Gloria Ladson-Billings noted in her 2004 article, "It's not the culture of poverty, it's the poverty of culture," that culture is regularly used as a code word for difference. We hope that as you watch our presentation, you come to understand the necessity of multicultural education and what it may eventually look like in your classroom. To begin, we provide a general definition. According to edglossary.org, multicultural education is any form of education or teaching that incorporates the histories, texts, values, beliefs, and perspectives from different cultural backgrounds. This type of education has not been the dominant type of education throughout the history of the United States. Historically, schooling was intended to assimilate groups not of the dominant culture, such as Native Americans, Asian Americans, and eventually African Americans. We now go into greater detail of just a few court cases which have great bearing on multicultural education in the United States.
Historical court cases involving multicultural classrooms. Now, we've all heard of Brown versus Board of Education, something that made it so every race could attend any school. However, you may have not heard of others such as Lee versus Johnson or Lau versus Nichols. These two court cases actually have very rippling effects throughout history, and we'll see actually how they affected a school district close to our home, Arcadia. To start with Lee versus Johnson. A Supreme Court case involving desegregation in schools, San Antonio school districts had attempted to move thousands of Chinese Americans from segregated schools into public schools. Now, while this being a great idea for many of us, the parents of these students sued the school district, to which their case was continuously denied all the way through the Supreme Court. Now, why would the parents prevent the desegregation of schools? Public schools did a poor job of teaching the Chinese culture, or any culture other than white. On top of this, none of the educators in those public schools had known Chinese, making it almost impossible for any Chinese student to go there with a somewhat lacking knowledge of English and gain a proper education. Now, this led us to Lau versus Nichols, involving those same students. So, the conclusion of Lee versus Johnson, Lee was denied by the Supreme Court, and this meant thousands of Chinese Americans would be moving into public schools for an equal education, in very big quotations. Now, of these students, there was 2,856 that were placed into public schools, and 1,000 of these students were given proper English lessons and flew through the education system with flying colors. Now, 1,800 plus of these were placed in special education or held back multiple years due to the fact that they didn't know English as well as some of their white counterparts. Edward H. Steinman told the family of Kinney Kinmon Lau that their rights under the Civil Rights Act of 1964 were being broken by the school, not providing equal educational opportunities for the children. The Supreme Court ruled in unanimous favor of Lau, meaning that schools must provide a meaningful education for any student, including those with limited English proficiency in their own language. Now, the Arcadia School District offers a language change option on their main page, something due to Lau versus Nichols. On top of that, their community involves a lot of Spanish-speaking citizens. So they implemented something called the ARC program, Academic Reinforcing Knowledge. With an emphasis on fun, this program helps students who fall behind in class or need help learning English, something that has been recognized on a national level. And this program helps every Hispanic student or Spanish-speaking student catch up in English or any other aspect of their educational journey. These sort of programs should be implemented in almost every school to follow through with Lau versus Nichols and provide a multicultural education that can be seen across the board for any school district.
Multicultural education can be implemented in the classroom in many ways. To make multicultural education more successful in the classroom, here are some tips. As an educator, you should encourage all of your students to participate in classroom activities. This will make all students, regardless of their differences, feel that they belong and have a place and purpose in your room. You should ask students open-ended questions to allow for deeper, more reflective thought. Open-ended questions allow students to reflect on their own thoughts or ideas and compare them to that of their peers. It is also important to create a classroom atmosphere that encourages emotional safety so that all students can feel free to share their thoughts and experiences in a setting that is open and accepting. Here are a few examples of how to implement multicultural education in your future classroom. The first example involves perspective taking. A role-playing activity would allow students to place themselves in someone else's shoes to learn about cultures other than their own. Students would be able to take on the perspective of someone who is different from them to expand their ideas about other cultures. This activity also allows students to reflect on their own beliefs and opinions by comparing them to those that they are acting out. It is important as an educator to encourage students to take part in thorough research of their person or character before acting them out to make sure their representations are accurate and respectful. The next classroom example allows for students to analyze issues with pop culture and the media. By analyzing issues of racism through pop culture, students will be able to compare their beliefs with the new information they will be presented. This will allow students to examine how the media shapes their ideas about certain topics in contrast to factual material. An example of this is having students look at the effects World War II had on Japanese Americans through political cartoons and movies. Next, by having students analyze issues of sexism through the media, students will be able to visualize how their beliefs about gender have been formed through the media. Having students think about stereotypes of men and women will allow for reflective thought on struggles they face in day-to-day life. The last classroom strategy is about creating a classroom atmosphere that encourages learning for all students. Sharing current events or news stories with your students related to classroom material can expose students to material that will cause them to reflect on how similar or different previous events are compared to current events. By supplying students with a diverse book selection, you will be exposing your students to a more universal human experience from multiple perspectives, backgrounds, and cultures. Teaching beyond the textbooks allows your students to be exposed to material that is from more perspectives than that of the textbook's creator. So what's next? We close our presentation with some considerations and suggestions for you as future teachers. What does multicultural education look like in your classroom? What can you do to not only be culturally respectful, but culturally competent? And finally, what can you do to further the principles of multicultural education beyond the walls of just your classroom? Additionally, we would like to highlight a few of the suggestions from Gloria Ladson-Billings. The following are just a few of the many ways to gain cultural competency and enhance your multicultural teaching ability. Attend functions in Hmong or African American communities, or those communities that are prevalent in the town in which you teach. Attend a church service in some of the communities, or attend a New Year's event in the Hmong community. We leave you with this quote to think about. In this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. Toni Morrison.